The dust kicked up around Emma Collins' boots as she marched down Willow Creek's only road. Her battered carpet bag clutched in white-knuckled fingers, and her chin held high despite the tears threatening to spill. She wouldn't give this town the satisfaction of seeing her break, not after everything they'd done. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life in the West had turned as bitter as week-old coffee. Emma had arrived 6 months earlier to teach at the newly established schoolhouse, only to find herself caught in the crossfire of local politics. The mayor's wife had taken an instant disliking to the educated 22-year-old from Boston, and when Emma had refused the advances of the mayor's brother, her fate was sealed. False accusations of impropriety with a student's father had spread through town like wildfire, and though entirely fabricated, the damage was done. Behind her, the morning bustle of Willow Creek continued, merchants opening shops, ranch hands milling about before heading to work. No one called after her. No one tried to stop her. That's what hurt the most. Emma adjusted her simple bonnet against the rising sun and picked up her pace. The stagecoach wouldn't arrive for another 3 days, and the nearest town was 30 miles away. She didn't care. Walking was better than spending another minute in a place that had broken her heart. The sound of hoofbeats approached from behind. Emma didn't turn. Probably just another rancher heading out for the day. The hoofbeats slowed, matching her pace, and she felt the presence of horse and rider beside her. "Not alone again," came a deep voice that Emma recognized immediately. "Not this time." She stopped and turned to face Ethan Everett, the rancher whose property bordered the town's eastern edge. He sat atop his chestnut gelding, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning sky, his weathered Stetson pulled low. "Mr. Everett," she acknowledged stiffly, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of making my own way." Ethan swung down from his horse with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his 28 years in the saddle. His tall frame towered over her, but his eyes, those startling blue eyes that had caught her attention the first day she'd arrived, were gentle. "I've no doubt of your capabilities, Miss Collins," he said, "but 30 miles of open country isn't something anyone should face alone. There are coyotes, bandits, and worse between here and Silverdale." "I'll take my chances with the coyotes," Emma replied bitterly. "They seem more honorable than the people of this town." Ethan's face hardened. "I heard what happened, the accusations. For what it's worth, I don't believe a word of it." Emma's composure threatened to crack. One kind word after months of suspicious glances and whispers behind her back was almost more than she could bear. "Your belief doesn't change anything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't stay here. I'm not asking you to." Ethan gestured to the open road ahead. "But I am asking you to let me ride with you to Silverdale. Once there, you can take the train anywhere you please, and I'll never bother you again." Emma studied him carefully. She'd had limited interactions with the quiet rancher, but what she knew of him suggested he was a decent man. He kept to himself mostly, showing up in town only when necessary for supplies or business. Unlike most men in Willow Creek, he'd always treated her with respect, tipping his hat when they passed and speaking to her as an equal rather than an oddity, an educated woman out west. "Why would you do that? You'd be gone at least 3 days. What about your ranch? My foreman can manage," Ethan said simply. As for why, he hesitated, seemingly struggling with his words. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because no one else in this God-forsaken town has the decency to do it." Emma weighed her options. Pride demanded she continue alone, but practicality couldn't be ignored. The journey would be dangerous for a solitary woman, no matter how determined. "You'll take me to Silverdale and nothing more," she confirmed. "You have my word." Emma nodded slowly. Very well, Mr. Everett. I accept your escort, though I want it clear I'm not returning to Willow Creek, regardless of what you might say along the way. A hint of a smile touched Ethan's lips. I wouldn't dream of trying to change your mind, Miss Collins. Your stubbornness is legendary among the schoolchildren. Despite herself, Emma felt a smile tug at her own lips. The children, they're the only ones I'll miss. Her expression clouded again. I hope my replacement is kind to them. Ethan adjusted his horse's saddle. We'll stop at my ranch first. It's on our way and you'll need proper supplies for the journey. That carpet bag won't suffice. Emma hesitated, but the logic was sound. I suppose that would be wise. Can you ride? Ethan asked, eyeing her long skirts. I grew up riding in Massachusetts, she replied, a touch of indignation in her voice, though it's been some time. Good. We'll get you a proper mount at the ranch. For now, you can ride with me. It's only a few miles. Before Emma could protest, Ethan had taken her carpet bag and secured it to his saddle. He extended his hand to help her up, and after a moment's hesitation, she accepted. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, speaking of years of honest labor. He swung up behind her, his arms reaching around to take the reins. Emma sat stiffly, uncomfortable with the proximity to a man she barely knew but grateful not to be walking. "Ready, Miss Collins?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes, Mr. Everett," she replied, fixing her gaze on the road ahead, away from Willow Creek and all its painful memories. "I'm more than ready to leave this place behind." As the horse began moving at a steady trot, Emma couldn't help glancing back one last time at the town that had promised so much and delivered so little. In the distance, she could see figures on the boardwalk watching her departure. Let them watch, she thought. Let them see what they've done. She turned forward again, her back straight and her resolve strengthened. Whatever lay ahead couldn't possibly be worse than what she was leaving behind. The ride to Ethan's ranch passed in relative silence. Emma was grateful he didn't press her with questions or attempt to fill the quiet with meaningless chatter. The prairie stretched out around them, golden under the morning sun, with the distant silhouette of mountains to the west. Despite her circumstances, Emma couldn't help but admire the raw beauty of the landscape. After about an hour, they crested a small rise, and Ethan's ranch came into view. Emma couldn't hide her surprise. She'd expected something modest, but what lay before her was impressive by any standard. A large main house built of sturdy logs sat nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn completed the picture, with cattle dotting the surrounding pastures. "Welcome to Everett Ranch," Ethan said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's beautiful," Emma admitted. "I had no idea your operation was so substantial." Ethan guided the horse toward the main house. "My father started with nothing but 50 acres and 10 head of cattle 25 years ago. Before he passed last year, we'd expanded to over 5,000 acres. "I'm sorry for your loss," Emma said softly. "Thank you." His voice was gruff. "He would have liked you, I think. He valued education highly, though he never had much himself." As they approached the house, a woman emerged onto the porch, tall and lean, with gray-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her eyes widened at the sight of Emma. "Mrs. Garcia," Ethan called as he helped Emma dismount. "We have a guest." The woman hurried down the steps, wiping her hands on her apron. "I can see that," she said, her accent revealing her Mexican heritage. "And here I thought you'd be gone just a few hours for supplies." There was no accusation in her tone, merely curiosity. "Change of plans," Ethan said. "Miss Collins, this is Elena Garcia, our housekeeper and the finest cook in the territory. Mrs. Garcia, Miss Emma Collins, the schoolteacher from town." "Former schoolteacher," Emma corrected quietly, Mrs. Garcia's eyes softened with understanding. "The rumors," she said simply. "I should have known better than to believe town gossip." Emma felt a rush of gratitude toward this stranger who seemed to immediately take her side. "Miss Collins will be staying with us briefly before we depart for Silverdale tomorrow morning," Ethan explained. "She'll need proper traveling attire and supplies." Mrs. Garcia nodded briskly. "Of course. Come inside, Miss Collins. You look like you could use some breakfast and coffee." Emma suddenly realized how hungry she was. In her haste to leave Willow Creek, she hadn't thought to eat. "That's very kind," she said. "Thank you." As they entered the house, Emma was struck by the unexpected comfort within. The furnishings were solid and well-made, with touches that spoke of female influence: embroidered cushions, curtains at the windows, and landscape paintings on the walls. "Your home is lovely," Emma commented, setting down her carpet bag. "My mother had a hand in most of it," Ethan explained. "She passed 5 years ago, but Mrs. Garcia has helped maintain her touches. And a constant battle it is, Mrs. Garcia said with a fond smile, "keeping things civilized with nothing but men about. Now sit, both of you. I'll have food ready in no time." While Mrs. Garcia bustled about in the kitchen, Ethan showed Emma to a small washroom where she could freshen up. The cool water was a blessing on her dusty face and hands. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror, cheeks flushed from the ride, wisps of auburn hair escaping her bonnet, green eyes still bright despite her exhaustion. For a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened, what she was leaving behind, and where she might go next. "Pull yourself together," she whispered to her reflection. "This is just the beginning of a new chapter." When Emma returned to the dining room, Ethan was speaking with a tall, weathered man who nodded seriously as Ethan gave instructions. "Miss Collins, this is Frank Peterson, my foreman," Ethan introduced them. "He'll be managing things while I'm gone." Frank tipped his hat. "Madam, don't you worry about the ranch. Me and the boys will keep everything running smooth as silk." "I appreciate you accommodating this unexpected journey," Emma said. "Least we could do," Frank replied, shooting a significant look at Ethan that Emma couldn't quite interpret. "Them folks in town don't know what they're losing." Mrs. Garcia emerged from the kitchen bearing plates of eggs, bacon, and freshly baked biscuits. The simple meal looked more appetizing than anything Emma had seen in months, and she realized she'd been subsisting on the meager offerings of her boarding house without much thought to nourishment. As they ate, Ethan outlined their journey. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow. It's 3 days to Silverdale if the weather holds. We'll need to camp 2 nights." Emma nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of anxiety at the thought of spending nights in the wilderness with a man she barely knew. As if reading her thoughts, Mrs. Garcia spoke up. "I'll be preparing a proper bedroll for you, Miss Collins, and some suitable riding clothes. Can't have you traveling in those city skirts." "I don't want to impose," Emma began. "Nonsense," Mrs. Garcia interrupted. "My daughter left some things behind when she married and moved to Santa Fe last year. She's about your size. The clothes will only gather dust otherwise." After breakfast, while Mrs. Garcia set about preparing for the journey, Ethan took Emma to the stables to select a horse. The cool dimness of the barn was a relief after the growing heat of the day. "This is Penny," Ethan said, stopping before a stall housing a dappled gray mare. "She's steady and gentle, but sure-footed on rough terrain. I think you'll get along well." The mare pushed her velvety nose against Emma's hand, and despite everything, Emma smiled. "She's beautiful." "She's yours for the journey," Ethan said. He hesitated, then added, "and longer if you'd like. Where do you plan to go after Silverdale?" Emma stroked Penny's neck, considering the question she'd been avoiding. I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps Denver, or back east, though I'd rather not face my family's disappointment. Disappointment? They didn't approve of my coming west, Emma explained. They thought it unseemly for a young woman of good breeding to venture into such uncivilized territory. Her mouth twisted in a humorless smile. I suppose they'll feel vindicated when I return with my tail between my legs. You don't have to go back, Ethan said quietly. There are other towns, other schools that would value a dedicated teacher. Perhaps, Emma conceded, though her confidence had been severely shaken. For now, I just need to get away from Willow Creek. They spent the afternoon preparing for the journey. Ethan showed Emma maps of their route while Mrs. Garcia altered riding clothes to fit her slender frame. By evening, Emma was exhausted but better equipped than she'd ever imagined being when she'd set out from town that morning. After a hearty supper, Mrs. Garcia showed Emma to a small but comfortable bedroom. "You get some rest now," the older woman said kindly. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Left alone, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry quiet, dignified tears for the dreams that had died in Willow Creek. When the tears subsided, she washed her face, changed into the nightgown Mrs. Garcia had provided, and slipped between the clean sheets. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Through the open window came the night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of a horse, the chorus of cicadas. And beneath it all, the hushed voices of Ethan and Mrs. Garcia on the porch below. "You're doing the right thing, Ethan," Mrs. Garcia was saying. "I know," came Ethan's reply, "but what happens after Silverdale? I can't just leave her there alone. That will be her choice to make. I've watched that town destroy her, Alina, bit by bit, day by day, all because she dared to be different, to stand her ground." There was a pause before Mrs. Garcia spoke again. "You admire her." "I do," Ethan admitted so softly Emma had to strain to hear. "More than I should, perhaps." "The heart wants what it wants," Mrs. Garcia said, her voice tinged with amusement, "though your timing could be better." "My timing has always been terrible," Ethan replied with a self-deprecating laugh. "Besides, she's leaving, and after what she's been through, the last thing she needs is another man complicating her life." Their voices faded as they moved away from the window, leaving Emma to ponder what she'd overheard. Ethan admired her. The thought was unexpected and oddly comforting. Not that it changed anything, she reminded herself firmly. She was still leaving, still starting over somewhere new. But as sleep finally claimed her, Emma found herself wondering what it might be like to stay, to build a life far from the pettiness of Willow Creek, but still under the vast western sky she'd come to love. Dawn arrived with a gentle knock at Emma's door. She was already awake, having risen to watch the sunrise paint the prairie in shades of pink and gold. The vastness of the land still took her breath away, even after 6 months in the West. "Miss Collins," Mrs. Garcia called, "breakfast is ready whenever you are." "Thank you," Emma replied. "I'll be right there." She dressed quickly in the clothes Mrs. Garcia had prepared, a split riding skirt of sturdy brown fabric, a cream-colored blouse, and a fitted vest. The outfit was practical yet feminine, far more suitable for travel than anything Emma owned. She braided her auburn hair and pinned it up, then added the wide-brimmed hat Mrs. Garcia had included to protect her fair skin from the sun. When she entered the kitchen, Ethan was already seated at the table, drinking coffee. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes before he quickly stood. "Good morning," he said. "You look prepared for the journey." "Thanks to Mrs. Garcia's generosity," Emma replied, feeling oddly self-conscious under his gaze. Breakfast was a hearty affair: flapjacks, eggs, and bacon, with more of Mrs. Garcia's excellent coffee. Emma ate eagerly, knowing they had a long day ahead. "The saddlebags are packed," Ethan informed her as they finished. "We have enough provisions for 4 days just in case. Bedrolls are secured, canteens filled." "You've thought of everything," Emma said, impressed by his thoroughness. "Not my first long ride," Ethan replied with a shrug. "Though usually I'm moving cattle, not escorting schoolteachers." His easy smile took any sting from the words, and Emma found herself smiling back. "Well, I promise to be less troublesome than a herd of cattle." "And considerably better company, I'd wager," Ethan said, his eyes twinkling. Mrs. Garcia cleared her throat meaningfully. "The day's wasting," she reminded them. "You'll want to reach Deerfield Creek by nightfall for a proper campsite." Outside, the horses were saddled and waiting. Frank and 2 other ranch hands stood by to see them off. "Remember, boss, Wheeler's expecting that cattle contract when you get back," Frank said as Ethan mounted his gelding. "I haven't forgotten," Ethan assured him. "Just make sure the south pasture is cleared for the new herd." Emma approached Penny, who stood patiently waiting. Though it had been some time since she'd ridden regularly, the familiar motions came back easily as she checked the cinch and adjusted the stirrups. "May I?" Ethan asked, offering his hand to help her mount. Emma hesitated only briefly before accepting. His strong grip steadied her as she swung into the saddle with more grace than she'd expected to manage after so long. The split skirt allowed her to sit properly astride, and she settled comfortably, taking the reins. "How does she feel?" Ethan asked. Emma smiled, genuinely this time. "Perfect." Mrs. Garcia approached, handing Emma a small package. "Some extra biscuits and dried apple slices," she explained. "The journey can be hungry work." "Thank you," Emma said, touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. "For everything." "Vea con Dios," Mrs. Garcia replied softly. "God go with you both." With final goodbyes exchanged, they set out, riding east across the rolling prairie. The morning was clear and cool, promising a beautiful day. Emma felt a surprising lightness in her heart as Willow Creek fell farther behind them. There was something liberating about the open country stretching before them, the unlimited horizon offering possibilities she hadn't considered before. They rode side by side when the terrain allowed, keeping a steady pace that wouldn't tire the horses. Ethan proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land they crossed. "See that rock formation to the north?" he asked, gesturing toward a distant outcropping. "The Cheyennes say it's where Sky Father first touched Earth Mother." "It's beautiful," Emma replied, shading her eyes to see better. "Have you lived here your whole life, Mr. Everett? Please call me Ethan," he said. "And yes, I was born in a cabin not far from where the main house stands now. My father came west during the gold rush of '49 but quickly realized that land, not gold, was the true wealth." "A wise man," Emma observed. "He had his moments," Ethan agreed with a fond smile. "What about you? What brought you all the way from Boston to our dusty corner of the world?" Emma was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "Freedom, I suppose," she finally said. "In Boston, my future was predetermined: marriage to a suitable gentleman, a life of social calls and charity work, children raised by nannies." She shook her head. "I wanted more. I wanted to make a difference. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in a growing western town, it seemed like providence." "And now?" Ethan asked gently. Emma sighed. "Now I'm not sure what I want besides distance from Willow Creek. I still believe in education, in the power of knowledge to transform lives. But perhaps I was naive to think I could change minds so set in their ways." "Not naive," Ethan corrected. "Brave. It takes courage to challenge the way things have always been." Their conversation flowed easily as the day progressed. They stopped at midday beside a small stream to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Garcia had packed. Emma stretched her legs, feeling the pleasant ache that came from hours in the saddle. "How are you holding up?" Ethan asked, handing her a canteen. "Better than expected," Emma admitted, taking a long drink, "though I suspect I'll be quite sore by evening." "We'll reach Deerfield Creek before sunset," Ethan promised. "It's a good spot to camp sheltered with fresh water." As they continued their journey, the landscape began to change, the flat prairie giving way to more varied terrain with scattered copses of trees and rocky outcroppings. Emma found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the journey, her initial wariness of Ethan fading with each passing hour. He was nothing like the men of Willow Creek, neither the rough, uncouth cowboys who frequented the saloons nor the self-important businessmen who dominated town affairs. There was a quiet confidence about him, an assurance that required no boasting or posturing. And more than once, Emma caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. The sun was low in the sky when they reached Deerfield Creek, a pretty spot where a stream cut through a small valley flanked by cottonwoods. Ethan helped Emma dismount, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "My legs feel like jelly," Emma admitted with a small laugh, holding onto the saddle for support. "It'll pass," Ethan assured her. "Walking will help." They set about making camp with efficient teamwork. Ethan unsaddled the horses and secured them where they could graze, while Emma gathered firewood from the nearby trees. Soon a cheerful fire was crackling, and Ethan was preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. As darkness fell, Emma found herself studying Ethan in the firelight. His features were strong, a straight nose, firm jaw shadowed with stubble, and those remarkably blue eyes that seemed to hold depths she couldn't fathom. He looked up suddenly, catching her gaze, and Emma quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. "Something wrong?" he asked. "No," Emma replied, busying herself with her coffee cup. "I was just thinking that you're nothing like I expected." "And what did you expect?" Emma considered the question. "I'm not sure. We've crossed paths in town, but I never really knew anything about you. The children mentioned you sometimes. Apparently your cattle drives are quite exciting to young boys dreaming of adventure." Ethan smiled. If they only knew how much of cattle driving is dust, boredom, and sore muscles. "Why did you really come after me today?" Emma asked suddenly, the question that had been nagging at her all day finally surfacing. "The truth, please." "It can't simply be common decency, or you would escort every departing resident of Willow Creek." Ethan set down his plate and looked at her directly, firelight dancing in his eyes. "You're right," he admitted. "It wasn't just decency." He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "I've watched you since you came to town, Miss Collins." "Emma," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Ethan, you should use my given name." He nodded. "Emma, I've watched you stand your ground against people who would have broken a lesser spirit. I've seen your kindness with the children, even those others deemed unteachable. When Samuel Jenkins' boy finally learned to read after 3 years of trying, the pride in that child's face." Ethan shook his head, smiling at the memory. "I knew then what a remarkable person you were." Emma felt warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. "You noticed all that. We've barely spoken more than polite greetings." "I notice more than people think," Ethan said simply. "And when I heard about the accusations, the way they were driving you out." His expression hardened. "I couldn't let you face that alone." "Thank you," Emma whispered, genuinely moved by his words. "Though I'm not sure what I've done to deserve such regard. Being yourself is enough," Ethan replied. After a moment, he added with a lighter tone, "Besides, I have a vested interest in good teachers. This country needs education to grow beyond lawless towns and cattle rustlers. Emma smiled, grateful for the shift to less emotionally charged territory. A rancher with progressive views on education. You're full of surprises, Ethan Everett. They talked late into the evening, the fire burning down to embers as they shared stories of their lives. Emma spoke of her childhood in Boston, her passion for learning that had led her to become a teacher. Ethan described growing up on the frontier, the challenges and rewards of building the ranch into what it had become. When Emma finally retired to her bedroll, wrapped in a warm blanket against the cooling night air, she found herself more confused than ever about her future. For the first time since the accusations had begun, she felt seen and valued for who she truly was. The thought of continuing to Silverdale, of saying goodbye to Ethan and boarding a train for parts unknown, no longer seemed like the clear path it had been that morning. She fell asleep watching the stars wheel overhead, more numerous and brilliant than she'd ever seen in Boston or even in Willow Creek. Somehow, out here in the wilderness with a man she barely knew yet increasingly trusted, Emma felt more at home than she had in months. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with dew sparkling on the grass and birdsong filling the air. Emma woke to the smell of coffee and found Ethan already up, tending the rekindled fire. He wore a fresh shirt, his hair damp from washing in the creek. "Good morning," he greeted her with a smile. "Sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes," Emma replied, sitting up and running a hand over her disheveled braid. She was acutely aware of how she must look after a night sleeping on the ground, but Ethan's gaze held nothing but warmth. "The creek's just around those trees if you'd like to freshen up," he offered. "Breakfast will be ready when you return." Grateful for the opportunity, Emma gathered her small bag of toiletries and made her way to the water. The creek was cool and clear, and she relished the feeling of washing her face and hands. She rebraided her hair and changed her blouse, feeling remarkably refreshed for someone camped in the wilderness. When she returned to the fire, Ethan had prepared a simple breakfast of coffee, hardtack softened in the pan with bacon grease, and dried fruit. "It's not Mrs. Garcia's cooking," he apologized, "but it'll keep us going until midday." "It's perfect," Emma assured him, accepting the tin plate with thanks. They ate in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. After breakfast, they broke camp efficiently, leaving little trace of their presence save the stone-ringed fire pit. "We should reach Miller's Crossing by nightfall," Ethan said as they mounted their horses. "It's a small settlement, just a trading post and a few cabins, but they'll have fresh supplies and news of the trail ahead." The second day's journey took them through increasingly varied terrain. The open prairie gave way to rolling hills dotted with pine and oak, with occasional rocky outcroppings offering sweeping views of the country they'd traversed. Emma found herself enjoying the changing landscape, pointing out wildflowers and birds she recognized from her nature books. "You know a lot about the natural world for a city girl," Ethan observed after she correctly identified a red-tailed hawk circling above. Emma smiled. "My father is an amateur naturalist. He filled our home with books on every plant and animal imaginable. I used to dream of discovering a new species and having it named after me." "Emma's magnificent bird," Ethan suggested with a teasing grin, "has a nice ring to it." "I was thinking more along the lines of Collinsium magnificum," Emma retorted, laughing. Their easy banter continued throughout the day, interspersed with comfortable silences. Emma found herself opening up about things she rarely discussed: her hopes, her disappointments, even her fears about what lay ahead. "You ever regret staying in one place?" she asked as they paused to rest the horses beside a small pond. You've built something remarkable at your ranch, but didn't you ever want to see what else the world held? Ethan considered the question seriously. I did once, he admitted, after my mother died. I thought about selling everything and heading to California or even abroad. He gazed out over the water. But this land, it gets in your blood. My father used to say we didn't own the ranch, it owned us. I didn't understand what he meant until I tried to leave. What changed your mind? I got as far as Denver, Ethan said with a self-deprecating smile. Stood at the train station with a ticket to San Francisco in my hand. But when the time came to board, I couldn't do it. I realized that everything that mattered to me was back at the ranch. He paused, then added quietly, or so I thought at the time. The weight of his words hung between them, and Emma found herself unable to meet his gaze, her heart beating a little faster. To mask her confusion, she stood and brushed off her skirt. We should probably continue if we want to reach Miller's Crossing by nightfall, she said. Ethan nodded, rising to his feet. Of course. As they rode on, Emma couldn't help reflecting on how quickly her feelings toward Ethan were changing. What had begun as gratitude for his escort was evolving into something deeper, more complex. His kindness, his quiet strength, his thoughtful perspectives on the world all were drawing her to him in ways she hadn't anticipated. But what did it matter? In another day they would reach Silverdale, and she would board a train for somewhere. Denver, perhaps, or further west to Oregon or California. Somewhere she could start fresh, without the shadow of Willow Creek's accusations. The thought didn't bring the comfort it had just a day ago. By mid-afternoon, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the wind had picked up considerably. We need to push harder, Ethan said, eyeing the darkening sky with concern. That storm looks mean, and I'd rather not be caught in the open when it hits. They urged their horses to a faster pace, the animals seemingly sensing the urgency as much as their riders. The first fat raindrops began to fall when the small collection of buildings that made up Miller's Crossing came into view. Almost there, Ethan encouraged as the rain intensified, driven sideways by gusting wind. By the time they reached the trading post, they were both soaked through. A weathered sign reading Miller's Trading Post and Lodging creaked in the wind above a sturdy log building. Warm light glowed from the windows, a beacon in the gathering gloom. Ethan dismounted quickly and helped Emma down, her sodden skirt heavy and clinging. "Get inside," he shouted over the wind. "I'll see to the horses." Emma didn't argue, hurrying up the steps and pushing open the heavy door. The interior was blessedly warm and dry, lit by oil lamps and a roaring fire in a stone hearth. Several men seated at rough wooden tables looked up at her entrance, surprise evident on their faces at the sight of a woman alone. A burly man with a thick gray beard approached from behind a counter. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his tone friendly but curious. "My companion is seeing to our horses," Emma explained, water dripping from her clothes onto the plank floor. "We were hoping for lodging for the night to wait out the storm." The man nodded. "Got one room available, 2 beds. "Will that suit?" Emma hesitated, a blush rising to her cheeks. She hadn't considered the sleeping arrangements in a settlement this small. Before she could respond, the door swung open again and Ethan entered, equally drenched. "Everett," the bearded man exclaimed. "Didn't recognize your lady friend here. Been what, 2 years?" "About that, Miller," Ethan replied, removing his dripping hat. "Good to see you're still keeping this place standing." "Barely, with the railroad bypassing us," Miller grumbled good-naturedly, "but we manage." "Was just telling your missus I've got 1 room available." "Miss Collins isn't my wife," Ethan corrected quickly. "We're traveling to Silverdale." Emma couldn't help noticing the looks exchanged between the men in the room at this clarification. Her reputation, it seemed, would be questioned even here. Miller looked between them, clearly reassessing the situation. "Well, room's still available," he said after a pause, "unless the lady prefers other arrangements." "The room will be fine," Emma said with as much dignity as she could muster while standing in a puddle of rainwater. "Mr. Everett can take one bed and I'll take the other." Miller nodded, apparently satisfied. $5, including dinner and breakfast. Stable for your horses is round back." Ethan paid while Emma tried to wring some of the water from her skirt. Once the transaction was complete, Miller led them upstairs to a small but clean room with 2 narrow beds, a washstand, and a single window rattling in the storm wind. "Dining room's open till 8, Miller informed them. "Got hot stew and fresh bread tonight. Might want to dry off before you come down." With that, he left them alone, closing the door behind him. An awkward silence fell between them. They'd spent the previous night in close proximity, of course, but the open air of the campsite had provided a sense of space and propriety that was markedly absent in the confines of the small room. "I'll step out while you change," Ethan offered, already turning toward the door. "No," Emma said quickly. "You're soaked through, you'll catch your death." She reached for her carpet bag, which Ethan had thoughtfully brought up. "I can use the privacy screen." A faded folding screen stood in one corner of the room. Emma took her bag behind it, grateful for even this minimal barrier. She could hear Ethan moving about the room, the sound of wet boots being removed, cloth rustling as he changed into dry clothes. Emma peeled off her wet garments, shivering as the cool air hit her damp skin. She dried herself as best she could with a small towel from her bag, then dressed in her last clean outfit, a simple blue dress more suited to teaching than riding, but at least it was dry. When she emerged from behind the screen, Ethan was dressed in fresh clothes as well, hanging his wet garments over a chair near the small iron stove that provided the room's heat. "Feel better?" he asked, his eyes briefly taking in her appearance before politely returning to her face. "Much," Emma replied, "though I fear my riding clothes won't be dry by morning." "We can see if Miller's wife has anything she might lend you," Ethan suggested, "or we can delay our departure until your things dry." The thought of spending an extra day in Miller's Crossing, extending their journey together, sent an unexpected thrill through Emma that she quickly suppressed. "We'll see what the morning brings," she said noncommittally. "Shall we go down for dinner? I find I'm quite hungry after our day's ride." The dining room was a simple extension of the trading post's main room, with several long tables where travelers and locals alike gathered for meals. The storm had driven in more patrons than usual, Miller explained as he led them to a small table near the fire. "Folks from the outlying homesteads," he said. "Nobody wants to be caught out in weather like this." The stew was hearty and flavorful, the bread still warm from the oven. Emma ate with genuine appetite, the physical exertion of their journey having kindled a hunger that the simple camp meals hadn't fully satisfied. Conversation flowed easily between them, but Emma was acutely aware of the occasional glances from other diners. A young, unmarried woman traveling alone with a man, even one as respected as Ethan appeared to be in these parts, was bound to raise eyebrows. "Ignore them," Ethan said quietly, noticing her discomfort. "Small settlements like this run on gossip even more than towns like Willow Creek." "It seems I can't escape judgment no matter where I go," Emma replied with a sigh. "People fear what they don't understand," Ethan said. "And an educated, independent woman like you confounds their expectations." "Is that how you see me? Confounding?" A small smile played at the corners of Ethan's mouth. "Among other things. Before Emma could ask what those other things might be, they were interrupted by Miller bringing a pot of coffee. "Storm's getting worse," he informed them as he filled their cups. "Telegraph lines down. Might be a few days before the roads clear properly." Emma and Ethan exchanged glances. "How bad is it?" Ethan asked. "Flash flooding on the low road to Silverdale," Miller replied. "Jenkins came in just now, said he barely made it through before the creek overflowed. Another fellow tried to follow him and lost his wagon." "Was he hurt?" Emma asked, concerned. "Nah, just wet and mad as a hornet," Miller assured her. "But nobody's getting through that way until the water recedes. High road's probably passable, but it adds a day to your journey and it's rough going." After Miller moved on to the next table, Ethan leaned closer to Emma. "What do you think? Wait it out or take the high road tomorrow?" The decision suddenly seemed weighted with significance beyond the simple practicalities of travel. Waiting meant more time in Ethan's company, in this liminal space between her past in Willow Creek and her uncertain future. Taking the high road meant pressing on, but with a longer journey ahead again, more time with Ethan. Either way, she realized, she was reluctant for their journey to end. "Let's see what the morning brings," she said again, not quite ready to commit to either option. When they returned to their room after dinner, the awkwardness of their shared accommodations resurfaced. The small space seemed even smaller as they prepared for bed, carefully maintaining distance, eyes averted at appropriate moments. "I'll turn my back while you get settled," Ethan offered, standing by the window where the rain lashed against the glass. Emma slipped beneath the covers, fully clothed save for her shoes, not having a proper nightgown that would be appropriate in such circumstances. When she was situated, Ethan moved to his own bed, removing only his boots before lying down atop the covers, using his coat as a blanket. "You'll be cold like that," Emma observed. "I've slept in worse conditions," Ethan replied with a small shrug. Emma blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the space in stark, momentary clarity. The storm raged outside, wind howling around the eaves of the building, rain beating a steady tattoo on the roof. "Ethan," Emma said softly after several minutes of listening to the storm. "Yes." His voice came quietly through the darkness. "Thank you, not just for the escort to Silverdale, but for—" She paused, searching for the right words, "for treating me like a person of value. It's been some time since I felt that." The silence that followed was so long that Emma wondered if he'd fallen asleep. Then, just as softly, "You are valuable, Emma, more than you know." Sleep was long in coming for Emma that night. Her mind filled with thoughts of the man breathing steadily in the bed across the small room, and the growing awareness that her feelings for him were becoming something she could no longer ignore. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness, the storm having blown itself out overnight. Sunlight streamed through the window, falling across Emma's face and waking her from a deep sleep. She blinked, momentarily disoriented, before remembering where she was. Ethan's bed was empty, the covers neatly arranged. Emma sat up, pushing her sleep-tangled hair from her face. Her riding clothes, which Ethan had hung near the stove to dry, were gone, presumably taken by him when he left. She dressed quickly in her blue dress, the only clean outfit she had remaining, and made her way downstairs. The trading post was already busy with locals coming to assess damage from the storm and stock up on supplies. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Miller's wife, a plump, pleasant-faced woman, spotted Emma and waved her over to the counter. "Your gentleman friend asked me to tell you he's checking on the horses and the road conditions," she explained. "Said he'd be back for breakfast." "Thank you, Mrs. Miller," Emma replied, relieved to know where Ethan had gone. "There's washing water out back if you'd like to freshen up," the woman offered kindly. "And I've put aside some cornbread and coffee for when you're ready." Emma gratefully accepted the offer, finding the promised basin of water in a small washroom off the kitchen. She did her best to make herself presentable, working her hair into a neat braid and washing her face and hands in the cool water. When she returned to the main room, Ethan had just entered, bringing with him the fresh scent of morning air and sunshine. "Good news," he announced as he joined her at a small table where Mrs. Miller was setting out breakfast. "The high road is clear, muddy in spots but passable. If we leave within the hour, we can make it to Baker's farm by nightfall and reach Silverdale by tomorrow afternoon." Emma nodded, trying to ignore the twinge of disappointment at how eager he seemed to continue their journey to be done with his obligation to her. "That sounds sensible," she agreed, pouring coffee for them both. They ate quickly, the excellent cornbread and preserves fortifying them for the day ahead. As they finished, Miller approached their table with a rolled newspaper. "Ryder came through with mail and news," he said, handing the paper to Ethan. "Thought you might be interested in what's happening in your neck of the woods." Ethan unrolled the Willow Creek Gazette, a weekly publication that Emma had often found frustratingly provincial in its viewpoints. His eyes scanned the front page, then widened slightly. "What is it?" Emma asked, noticing his expression. Wordlessly, Ethan handed her the paper. The headline leapt out at her. "Schoolteacher allegations, proven false mayor, Hargrove's brother confesses to fabricating claims." Emma's hands trembled as she read the article. According to the report, Thomas Hargrove, the mayor's brother, had confessed to inventing the allegations against her after she had spurned his advances. His confession had come after heavy drinking at the saloon, where he'd boasted of putting that uppity Boston girl in her place. Several witnesses had come forward, and the town council had voted to formally clear her name and offer her position back with a public apology. "I don't believe it," Emma whispered, emotions warring within her vindication, anger, relief, and something like disappointment that the truth had come too late. "Will you go back?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully neutral. Emma looked up from the paper, studying his face. "Would you go back to people who were so quick to believe the worst of you without evidence?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I can't say what I'd do in your position," he finally replied. "But I do know the children would benefit from your return, and not everyone believed the accusations." "You didn't," Emma acknowledged, "though you never said anything." A flash of shame crossed Ethan's features. "I should have. I regret my silence now." Emma reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "You're making up for it by being here now." They finished their breakfast in thoughtful silence, each contemplating the new information and what it might mean for their journey and beyond. As they prepared to leave, Emma found herself torn. The vindication she'd hoped for had arrived, but it didn't bring the satisfaction she'd expected. The idea of returning to Willow Creek, even with her name cleared, left her cold. Yet the alternative, continuing to Silverdale, and an uncertain future alone, no longer held the appeal it once did. Ethan had arranged for their horses to be brought around, and Emma's riding clothes, now dry, were returned to her. She changed quickly behind the trading post's privacy screen, her mind still racing with possibilities. When she emerged, Ethan was waiting with the horses, his expression unreadable as he helped her mount. "You're very quiet," he observed as they set out, leaving Miller's crossing behind and taking the winding path that would lead them up into the hills, the high road to Silverdale. "I have much to think about," Emma replied honestly. "Everything has changed since yesterday." "Has it?" Ethan asked. The truth was always the truth, whether anyone in Willow Creek believed it or not. That's not what I meant, Emma said, guiding Penny around a muddy section of trail. I mean, my options have changed. Before, I was fleeing in disgrace. Now you could go back with your head held high, Ethan finished for her. Accept their apologies and resume your position. Emma nodded. I could, but would anything really be different? The same narrow minds, the same provincial attitudes. They might apologize now, but the next time I challenge their comfortable assumptions, will they be so quick to believe the worst again? People can change, Ethan said. Sometimes they just need a reason to. They rode in silence for a time, the trail gradually climbing, offering expansive views of the country below. The storm had washed everything clean, and the world seemed renewed, vibrant with possibility. What would you do? Emma finally asked. If you were me, truly. Would you return to Willow Creek? Ethan was quiet for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was thoughtful, measured. I think I would go where I felt most valued, most able to do good in the world, most at home. And where is home for you, Ethan? Emma pressed, sensing something important in his answer. He turned to look at her then, his blue eyes intense. Home isn't always a place, he said softly. Sometimes it's where or who makes you feel like you belong. The weight of his words hung between them as they continued to climb, the trail becoming steeper, requiring their full attention. But Emma couldn't stop thinking about what Ethan had said about home, about belonging. Where did she belong? Not in Boston, with its rigid social structures and predetermined paths. Not in Willow Creek, despite her vindication. Where then? The answer was beginning to form in her heart, though she wasn't yet ready to acknowledge it fully. They stopped to rest the horses at midday, finding a grassy clearing with a small spring. The sun was warm, drying the last of the previous night's rain from the landscape. Emma spread a blanket on a patch of grass while Ethan saw to the horses, and they shared the provisions Mrs. Miller had packed for them: cold chicken, biscuits, and apples. Tell me about Silverdale, Emma said as they ate. What kind of place is it? Larger than Willow Creek, Ethan replied. More established. It's a railroad town, so there's constant coming and going. Less provincial in some ways, more commercial in others. He paused, then added, they have a school, a good one from what I've heard, 2 teachers already. They might not need another, Emma mused, or they might welcome someone with your experience and dedication. Emma studied his face. You think I should inquire about a position there? It wasn't a question, but Ethan answered anyway. I think you should consider all your options before deciding. All my options, Emma repeated softly. And what would those be in your estimation? Ethan set down his plate and met her gaze directly. You could return to Willow Creek. You could continue to Silverdale and seek a position there, or take the train further west. You could. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. You could consider staying somewhere closer to hand. Emma's heart quickened. Closer to hand, Emma, Ethan began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. These past 3 days have been, I've come to. He shook his head in frustration. I'm not good with words the way you are. You're doing fine, Emma encouraged, hardly daring to hope he meant what she thought he did. Ethan took a deep breath. I admired you from afar in Willow Creek. I admired your courage, your intelligence, your kindness. But these past days, traveling with you, talking with you. He looked away, then back, his eyes determined. I've come to care for you, Emma. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances, and the thought of saying goodbye in Silverdale. He shook his head again. I don't want to say goodbye. Emma felt warmth spreading through her chest, a lightness she hadn't experienced in longer than she could remember. I don't want to say goodbye either, she admitted softly. What are you saying? Ethan asked, hope and caution warring in his expression. I'm saying that I've been wondering what it might be like to build a life away from Willow Creek, but still under this western sky," Emma replied, deliberately echoing the thoughts she'd had that first night at Ethan's ranch. "I'm saying that these past days have shown me what it feels like to be truly seen and valued." Ethan moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Are you considering staying at the ranch? Is that what you're asking me to do?" "Yes," Ethan said firmly, all hesitation gone from his voice. "Yes, Emma Collins, that's exactly what I'm asking. Stay with me. Not as a guest, not temporarily, but—" He paused, seemingly searching her face for any sign of resistance. Finding none, he continued, "Stay with me as my wife if you'll have me. Help me build something even better than what my father started. Teach the children on the neighboring farms if you wish. God knows they need proper schooling. Or start something new entirely. Whatever would make you happy." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "You make me happy, Ethan Everett," she whispered. "These past days, despite everything, have been the happiest I've known." "Is that a yes?" Ethan asked, his voice rough with emotion. "It's a yes," Emma confirmed, her heart feeling as though it might burst with unexpected joy. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife." Ethan's face broke into a smile of such radiance that Emma caught her breath. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss a promise of everything to come. When they parted, Emma couldn't help laughing, a sound of pure happiness. "What will Mrs. Garcia say when we return instead of continuing to Silverdale?" Ethan grinned. "She'll say she knew it all along. She has an uncanny instinct about these things. And the people of Willow Creek?" Emma asked, a shadow of doubt crossing her face. "They'll talk. Let them," Ethan said dismissively. "What matters is what we build together, not what others say about it." They repacked their things and mounted their horses, but instead of continuing on the high road to Silverdale, they turned back, taking a different trail that would lead them home to Everett Ranch. As they rode side by side, planning their future together, Emma realized that she had found what she'd been seeking all along, not just a place to belong, but a person to belong with. The open sky above them, the vast land stretching in all directions, no longer represented an escape, but a promise of the life they would build together. The journey back to the ranch took them a full day longer than their outward journey had, partly because they chose a more scenic route, and partly because they were in no hurry, savoring each moment together now that their future was decided. They stopped often to rest the horses, to admire particularly beautiful vistas, and sometimes simply to talk, making plans for their life together. Ethan spoke of improvements he'd been considering for the ranch, while Emma shared her ideas for establishing a small school for the children of neighboring farms and ranches. "The east wing of the house has a large room that's barely used," Ethan suggested as they made camp on their final night before reaching the ranch. "It would make a fine schoolroom with some adjustments." "You'd give up part of your home for a school?" Emma asked, touched by his support. "Our home," Ethan corrected gently. "And yes, gladly. Education matters, Emma. What you do matters." They reached Everett Ranch late the following afternoon. As their horses crested the final rise, the buildings came into view, golden in the slanting light of the setting sun. Emma felt a surge of emotion at the sight this place that would now be her home. Mrs. Garcia was the first to spot them, emerging onto the porch with a hand shading her eyes. Her expression of surprise quickly gave way to knowing satisfaction as she took in their happy faces and the way they rode close together, clearly at ease in each other's company. "Back so soon?" she called as they approached. "I wasn't expecting you for days yet." "Change of plans," Ethan replied, dismounting and helping Emma down from her horse. "Mrs. Garcia, I'd like to introduce you to the future Mrs. Everett." The housekeeper's face broke into a wide smile. "Gracias a Dios," she exclaimed. "It's about time, Ethan Everett." She embraced Emma warmly. "Welcome home, Nina. I knew from the moment I saw you that you belonged here." Frank and the other hands gathered round as the news spread, offering congratulations and good-natured teasing to their boss. Emma was struck by the genuine warmth of their welcome, so different from the cold suspicion she'd faced in Willow Creek. Over a celebratory dinner that night, Mrs. Garcia had insisted on preparing something special. Once she heard the news, they discussed practical matters. The wedding would be small and soon, held at the ranch rather than in town. Emma would write to her family in Boston, though she held little hope they would make the journey west for the ceremony. "And what of Willow Creek?" Mrs. Garcia asked as she served apple pie for dessert. "Will you tell them of your plans?" Emma exchanged a glance with Ethan. "I think we should," she said after a moment's consideration. "Not for their approval, but because hiding would suggest we have something to be ashamed of, which we don't." Ethan nodded, taking her hand. "We'll ride into town tomorrow if you're feeling up to it. Face whatever gossip comes our way together." The next morning dawned clear and beautiful. Emma dressed carefully in the blue dress she'd worn at Miller's Crossing, her heart fluttering with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness at the thought of returning to Willow Creek, not as a disgraced schoolteacher fleeing scandal, but as Ethan Everett's fiancée. Ethan hitched the wagon rather than saddling horses for their trip to town. "More dignified this way," he explained with a wink as he helped Emma up onto the seat. The 10-mile journey to Willow Creek passed quickly, their conversation flowing easily as they continued making plans for their future. Emma was struck again by how natural it felt to be with Ethan, as though they'd known each other for years rather than days. As they approached the outskirts of town, Emma felt her anxiety rising. What if they're not as contrite as the newspaper suggested? What if they still believe the worst of me? Ethan's hand covered hers reassuringly. "Then we leave and never look back, but I suspect you'll find a very different reception than the one you left." He was right. As the wagon rolled down Willow Creek's main street, heads turned and whispers followed them, but they were whispers of surprise and interest, not condemnation. Several people called out greetings to Ethan, their curious gazes moving to Emma with obvious questions in their eyes. They stopped first at the general store, where news of Emma's vindication had clearly spread. The storekeeper's wife, who had once been coldly polite at best, now greeted her with effusive warmth. "Miss Collins, we've all been so worried about you since you left. The whole town's been talking about that dreadful Thomas Hargrove and his lies. Why, the mayor himself came in yesterday saying they hope you'll return to the school." Emma accepted the woman's apologies with grace, though she noticed how the woman's eyes widened when Ethan stood protectively close, his hand at the small of Emma's back. Their next stop was the mayor's office. Mayor Hargrove, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, rose from his desk in evident surprise when they entered. "Miss Collins, Mr. Everett, this is unexpected." His eyes darted between them, noting their proximity to each other. "We've been hoping you might return, Miss Collins, once you heard about the clarification of the unfortunate situation." "That's partly why we're here today, Mayor," Ethan said before Emma could respond. "To inform you that Miss Collins won't be returning to her position at the school." The mayor's face fell. "But why? The town council has voted unanimously to offer a public apology and of course your position back with a raise in salary." "That's very generous," Emma said, finding her voice, "but circumstances have changed." She glanced up at Ethan, drawing strength from his presence. "Mr. Everett and I are to be married. I'll be establishing a small school at Everett Ranch for the children of the outlying farms." Mayor Hargrove's jaw dropped momentarily before he collected himself. "Married? Well, this is unexpected news indeed. Congratulations to you both." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Though I must say, the town will be disappointed to lose you as a teacher, Miss Collins." "Perhaps the town should have considered my value before so readily believing falsehoods about my character," Emma replied, her tone gentle but firm. The mayor had the grace to look ashamed. "Yes, well, a regrettable situation all around. My brother has been sent to stay with relatives in St. Louis. His behavior was inexcusable." Their final stop was the schoolhouse, where Emma collected the few personal items she'd left behind in her hasty departure. The building was empty of children, being Saturday, but she took a moment to stand in the classroom, remembering the good moments amid the difficult ones. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked quietly, watching her trail her fingers along the edge of her desk. "You were a good teacher here, despite everything. The children loved you." Emma turned to him with a smile. "I'm sure. The children at the outlying farms need education just as much, if not more so. And besides," she added, taking his hand, "my heart is at Everett Ranch now." As they walked back to the wagon, a small figure came running down the street toward them. Emma recognized 10-year-old Sarah Jenkins, one of her brightest pupils. "Miss Collins," the girl called, skidding to a stop before them. "You came back. Are you going to be our teacher again?" Emma knelt to be at eye level with the child. "Not at the school, Sarah. I'm going to be living at Mr. Everett's ranch. We're going to be married." Sarah's eyes widened. "Married, like in the storybooks?" She looked up at Ethan with new interest. "Is he your prince, Miss Collins?" Emma laughed, glancing up at Ethan's amused face. "Something like that, yes. Will you still teach?" "Yes, but at the ranch, for the children who live too far from town to attend the school here." Sarah considered this information seriously. "That's good. Billy Cooper says they ain't never learned their letters proper because they can't come to town every day." "Haven't," Emma corrected automatically, then smiled. "And yes, that's exactly why we need a school there." After promising to visit when she could, Emma said goodbye to Sarah and climbed into the wagon beside Ethan. As they drove out of Willow Creek, she felt a curious mixture of closure and new beginnings. The town that had once seemed the end of her dreams now appeared small and limited compared to the future stretching before her. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked as the town receded behind them. Emma nodded, smiling up at him. "More than all right, I feel free." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. News of their engagement spread quickly through the surrounding countryside, and neighbors Emma had never met rode for miles to welcome her to the community. Unlike the sometimes superficial warmth of Willow Creek society, these farming and ranching families were genuinely welcoming, many expressing delight at the prospect of a proper school for their children. Emma threw herself into preparing for both the wedding and the school. The East Wing room Ethan had suggested proved perfect for a classroom after some renovation. Ethan ordered proper desks and a blackboard from Denver, while Emma cataloged the books already in the house and made lists of others they would need. Mrs. Garcia supervised the preparations for the wedding with efficient enthusiasm, transforming the ranch house with fresh paint and new curtains. "A house needs a woman's touch," she declared, though Emma insisted the housekeeper had already provided that admirably. "It's different with a mistress of the house," Mrs. Garcia replied with a knowing smile. "You'll see." Emma wrote to her family in Boston, a long letter explaining everything that had happened and inviting them to the wedding, though she held little hope they would attend on such short notice. To her surprise, a telegram arrived a week later. Arriving Silverdale June 15. Stop father, mother, sister, Elizabeth. Stop, eager to meet your Ethan. Stop, they're coming, she told Ethan that evening, still marveling at the news. My family is actually coming to the wedding. Of course they are, Ethan replied, pulling her close. They want to see the happiness you've found. That's what families do. Emma leaned into his embrace, marveling at how quickly her life had changed, how the disaster of her departure from Willow Creek had led to greater joy than she could have imagined. The day before her family was due to arrive, Emma stood in what would soon be her classroom, arranging books on the newly installed shelves. Sunlight streamed through the large windows Ethan had added, illuminating the fresh white walls and polished wooden floor. 10 desks of varying sizes stood in neat rows, awaiting the children who would soon fill them. It's coming together beautifully, Ethan said from the doorway, watching her with a fond smile. It is, isn't it? Emma agreed, looking around with satisfaction. I've already received word from 12 families who want to send their children. We'll need to consider a second teacher if many more join. One step at a time, Ethan advised, crossing the room to stand beside her. Though I have no doubt your little school will grow beyond these walls eventually. Emma leaned against him, content in a way she'd never experienced before. I never imagined my life taking this turn, she admitted. When I left Willow Creek that morning, I thought my Western adventure was ending in failure. Instead, it was just beginning. Do you ever regret it? Ethan asked. Not going to Silverdale that day, not seeing what might have lain beyond. Emma shook her head decisively. Never. How could I regret finding everything I never knew I wanted? She turned in his arms to face him. Do you? You never expected to become a husband and part-time school proprietor when you rode after me. Ethan laughed, the sound warming her heart as it always did. My only regret is not speaking to you sooner. All those months in Willow Creek, watching you from afar, too tongue-tied to do more than tip my hat when we passed on the street. We've made up for lost time, Emma said softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. Ethan bent to kiss her, a gentle reminder of all they'd found together and all that lay ahead. When they parted, he said, We should get ready. Your family will be arriving on tomorrow's train, and we need to be in Silverdale to meet them. Emma nodded, suddenly nervous at the thought of her proper Boston family meeting Ethan and seeing the life she'd chosen. Would they understand? Would they approve? It shouldn't matter, she was a grown woman making her own choices, but she found she wanted their blessing nonetheless. The next day dawned clear and warm, a perfect June morning. Emma dressed carefully in her best dress, a new one Ethan had insisted on ordering from Denver when they'd announced their engagement. The pale blue fabric complemented her auburn hair and green eyes, and the stylish but practical cut suited her new life as a rancher's wife. You look beautiful, Ethan said when she joined him on the porch, his admiring gaze sending a blush to her cheeks even after weeks of courtship. And you look very handsome, she replied, taking in his dark suit and crisp white shirt. He'd had his hair cut the day before, and his clean-shaven face highlighted his strong jawline and those remarkable blue eyes that had first caught her attention. The journey to Silverdale took most of the morning. As the train station came into view, Emma felt her nervousness increase. It had been over a year since she'd seen her family, and so much had changed. She had changed in that time. The train was just pulling in as they arrived. Emma stood beside Ethan on the platform, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, watching as passengers began to disembark. And then there they were, her father, tall and distinguished with his silver-streaked dark hair, her mother, elegant as always in a traveling suit that spoke of Boston's best tailoring, and her younger sister Elizabeth, pretty and poised at 20. Emma. Elizabeth spotted her first, waving excitedly before hurrying toward them, propriety forgotten in her enthusiasm. The sisters embraced, laughing and talking over each other in their excitement. Then her parents were there, her father's eyes suspiciously bright as he hugged her close. "My brave girl," he murmured. "Look at you, you're positively glowing." Her mother's embrace was more reserved but no less heartfelt. "We've been so worried," she admitted. "Your letters were always cheerful, but mothers know when their children are holding back." Finally, Emma turned to introduce Ethan, who had been waiting patiently. "Mother, father, Elizabeth, this is Ethan Everett." Ethan stepped forward, extending his hand to her father. "Mr. Collins, it's an honor to meet you. I can see where Emma gets her strength of character." Her father's handshake was firm, his assessing gaze taking in everything about the man who would soon be his son-in-law. "Mr. Everett, I understand you're responsible for my daughter's current happiness. For that, you have my gratitude." "The happiness is mutual, sir, I assure you," Ethan replied with sincerity that Emma knew her father would appreciate. To her relief, the initial meeting went smoothly, her family responding to Ethan's quiet confidence and evident adoration of her. As they rode back to the ranch in the wagon, her father engaged Ethan in conversation about the cattle business, while her mother and Elizabeth exclaimed over the beauty of the landscape. "It's so vast," Elizabeth marveled, gazing at the open country. "No wonder you fell in love with it, Emma." "The land does get in your blood," Emma agreed, exchanging a smile with Ethan. "Though that's not all I fell in love with." When they arrived at the ranch, Mrs. Garcia had outdone herself preparing a welcome meal. The house was spotless, filled with fresh flowers from the garden and delicious aromas wafted from the kitchen. "This is your home?" her mother asked as Ethan showed them inside. Emma could hear the surprise in her voice clearly. She'd expected something far more primitive. "It is," Emma confirmed proudly. "And soon it will also be a school for the children of the neighboring farms." Her father's eyebrows rose. "A school? Here." "I'll show you," Emma said, leading them to the east wing where her classroom waited. As she explained her plans, she saw her father's expression change from skepticism to admiration. "You found your calling," he said when she'd finished. "I see that now. When you first told us you were going west to teach, I feared you were running away from something." "But you were running toward your future, weren't you?" Emma nodded, tears pricking her eyes at his understanding. "I was, though I didn't know exactly what that future would look like until recently." Later that evening, after dinner, Emma found herself alone with her mother on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "He's a good man," her mother said after a comfortable silence. "You're Ethan." "The best," Emma agreed, "and you love him very much." "I do." Emma turned to face her mother. "I know it seems sudden," her mother held up a hand to stop her. "Love doesn't always require lengthy courtships and formal procedures, Emma. Your father and I knew within a week of meeting that we would marry. When it's right, it's right." Emma blinked in surprise. "I never knew that about you and father." Her mother smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes that Emma rarely saw. "There's a great deal you don't know about your parents, my dear. We had our own adventures before we settled into respectable Boston society." The wedding took place 3 days later under a clear blue sky. Ethan had arranged for an arbor to be built in the garden, covered in climbing roses that Mrs. Garcia had somehow coaxed into full bloom just in time. Neighbors from miles around gathered to witness the ceremony, along with a few of Emma's former students from Willow Creek, who had begged their parents to bring them. Emma wore a gown of ivory silk, that her mother had remarkably managed to pack without damage her own wedding dress, altered by Mrs. Garcia's skilled hands to fit Emma perfectly. Her hair was adorned with tiny white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered that morning. As her father walked her toward the arbor where Ethan waited with the minister, Emma felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, in this place, with this man, surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was. Ethan's face as he watched her approach was a study in joy and wonder. When her father placed her hand in his, she felt the slight tremor that belied his outward calm. His blue eyes held hers as they spoke their vows, his voice clear and steady as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and the gathering erupted in cheers as Ethan kissed her their first kiss as a married couple, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration continued well into the evening, with food and music and dancing under lantern light. Emma moved from conversation to conversation, her heart full as she watched her Boston family mingling easily with her new Western neighbors. "Happy, Mrs. Everett?" Ethan asked, finding her at the edge of the gathering, taking a moment to catch her breath. "Extremely, Mr. Everett," she replied, leaning into him as his arm slipped around her waist. "Though I'm still getting used to my new name." "You have a lifetime to practice," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Emma's father sought them out, drawing them slightly away from the remaining revelers. "I have a wedding gift for you both," he said, handing Ethan an envelope. "Something to help with that school of yours." Ethan opened the envelope, his eyes widening as he read the document inside. "Mr. Collins, this is extremely generous. What is it?" Emma asked, peering at the paper. "Your father has established a trust for the school," Ethan explained, his voice reflecting his astonishment. "Enough to pay for a second teacher when needed, books, supplies, everything you could need for years to come." Emma turned to her father, speechless with gratitude. He shrugged, seemingly embarrassed by their reaction. "Education has always mattered to our family," he said simply. "What you're doing here matters, Emma. I want to help ensure it succeeds." "Thank you," she managed, embracing him tightly. "For this, for coming, for understanding, for everything." Her father's eyes were suspiciously bright as he released her. "Your mother and I are very proud of you, Emma. Never doubt that." The Collins family departed 2 days later, returning to Boston with promises to visit again the following summer. Elizabeth, in particular, had fallen in love with the West and whispered to Emma that she might consider coming to teach at the school once she'd completed her own education. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Emma's school opened with 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 16, all eager for the education they'd previously been denied by distance. The days were long but fulfilling, and the evenings. The evenings were for Ethan and Emma alone, learning each other, building their life together. One evening in late autumn, with the first hint of winter in the air, they sat on the porch after dinner, wrapped in a blanket against the chill. The land stretched dark and peaceful before them, stars beginning to emerge in the deepening blue of the sky. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. It had become a familiar question between them, a check-in of sorts as they navigated their new life together. "None," Emma replied without hesitation. "Except perhaps one." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Oh." "I wish I'd had the courage to leave Willow Creek sooner," she explained. "To walk out of town on my own terms before things got so unpleasant. We might have found each other sooner." Ethan considered this, then shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe the timing was exactly as it needed to be." You walking out of town alone, me riding beside you saying not alone again. He smiled at the memory. Would you have listened to me before you were ready to leave that place behind? Emma thought about it, then conceded with a smile. Probably not. I can be rather stubborn, as you're discovering. One of the many things I love about you, Ethan assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. Your determination, your courage, your unwillingness to compromise your principles. Emma turned in his arms to face him. And I love your quiet strength, your kindness, your ability to see what matters most when others miss it entirely. As they sat together watching night fall completely over the land that was now truly their home, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain and disappointment of Willow Creek had led to greater joy than she could have imagined. Her attempt to walk away alone had instead brought her to the very place and the very person where she belonged. Not alone again, she murmured, echoing Ethan's words from that fateful day. Never alone again, he promised, his arms tightening around her. Not as long as I have breath in my body. And as the stars emerged one by one in the vast western sky, Emma Everett knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world, not in the city she'd left behind, not in the town that had rejected her, but here, on this land, with this man, building a future together that would be richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have planned for herself. She had tried to walk out of town alone, but fate and a determined cowboy had other ideas, and for that, she would be forever grateful.